So, David, it's great to have you here. I'm Laurie Neverman, and this is the Stories of Resilience video series. And I'm welcoming David Stelzer, founder of Azure Standard, and he is here to share a crazy story. It almost seems like it should be fiction, but he lived it. So I'm very that you're here to share it with us. And if you could tell our viewers a little bit about your background, including your early health challenges, and where you started out.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. That's good. Um, you know, I it kind of starts. It was really more my parents than me in many ways, as far as making those decisions. But I was the sickly kid. There was the doctors didn't have much hope for me. It was a chronic lung issue. They called it some kind of a chronic asthmatic condition of some sort. They didn't know what it was. Went to specialist after specialist, and it was always, and basically the prognosis was kind of dim. My lungs were eventually going to fill up with scar tissue, and I probably wouldn't make it very long. There might be some new steroid therapy or something that was coming out. I mean, this was a long time ago, so um, the drugs were a little bit different. So my parents, they kept trying, and they finally ran into a naturopathic doctor, and I have no idea how they found out about him, truthfully. Um, but he basically took a look at me and he said, "Oh, this is all diet related." And he told my parents to completely transform the diet in our home. And that my diet was even to be a little bit more special than that, in the sense that particularly any kind of sugar or dairy products. Even though he didn't necessarily say that in our family's home that couldn't be there. But for me, that was not to be. But he told them, change the whole family's diet. Make sure you get all those refined foods out, that old bleached white flour, the white sugar, the white table salt, the Crisco, all this stuff that, they used in, back then,
So
I guess it was.
Crisco was a staple back especially with big families. I know my mom always had a container of it sitting in the kitchen. It was just, well, that's what you use. So
Yeah, it's the stuff, It was, back then they thought Crisco was better than coconut oil because coconut oil was probably poisonous. It's like, um, but anyway, so my parents actually bought in, and they were never halfway people. They were never. Dad was definitely not a
Oh yeah, yeah. From reading the book,
little.
absolutely.
So he threw it all away, gathered up everything in the house, and actually put it all in the chicken yard. And the crazy thing was, the next morning, half the chickens were dead. True
Really? You didn't
story.
include
True
that in the book?
story. I don't. Maybe I didn't. But yeah, they said, "Oh well, we don't want to waste it, so we'll put it in for the chickens."
But you can't feed them, part of that is you can't feed them just straight uncooked flour because I know that because I got a chicken poultry friend who's very into poultry. She said now she found herself, she had some flour that was near expiration. She actually baked it into something to feed it to the chickens because they will eat it and it gums them up. So it could be that, or
It
it
could
could
have
be
been there was too
that.
much white flour, but you mix in the white sugar and all the other stuff they had. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was too young to know what killed the chickens, but they
Yeah.
were didn't,
Yeah, probably not
didn't.
something you want to repeat, just whatever it
But
was.
it helped drive it in that this stuff was probably not the best for us.
Hmm.
So they did change and never looked back. Obviously, the diet's changed a little bit over the years since then. But as far as those kinds of things and the refined foods and all of that, never looked back. Never used those again. um, and they didn't for their entire lives. Um, and we haven't in our family. That's just not something, we just don't have any of that stuff in our house. And so it changed my health trajectory. So heading towards, and it wasn't instant. It took the better part of a year before I really saw radical improvement. So if they really weren't committed and they'd have tried it for a month or even 60 days or 90 days, I don't really see much difference. That naturopath probably was all full of it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um,
And I know that's a common people that a problem that people run into is they think, well, I'm not getting results right away. It's not like taking a pill. Your body has to work through things. Your body needs time to heal. So it generally takes longer than most conventional treatment to allow that healing process to run its course.
and a lot of the natural foods treatments don't take as long as it took for me because mine was extremely serious,
Hmm.
you know. But not saying a lot of people don't have serious issues these days that
Yeah, too
can be
common.
changed and cured by diet. So, and I hear about them quite a bit through Azure customers, that have changed their diet, got hooked up with Azure as a food supplier, and they've seen those kinds of results. And sometimes they're faster and sometimes they're not as fast, but they're almost consistently always happen. They will get they will get substantially better results by eating unrefined foods. Even I mean, we can do better even with refined foods. In my case, not having any sugar, refined, organic, or otherwise, was probably kind of a big. I mean, that was a big deal for in my life. Um, I mean, I could have fruit and stuff like that. So it wasn't like I couldn't have anything sweet ever.
Mhm.
But my sweets were things like cherries and apricots and peaches. And
It's
I
certainly
was
different
so.
than the standard American diet. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from the time I was 4 years old, I guess to this day, I've really never had a piece of candy. It's like, just doesn't happen because I know that my body can't handle that. And a lot of people's body can't, they just don't know it yet.
Mm.
And, but anyway, there's kind of my health journey. It took about a year. It was bad enough. I was really scrawny and stunted. My growth was stunted. I was so scrawny that the school didn't want me in kindergarten. I was too sickly and scrawny. Um, so I ended up going straight into first grade. I didn't attend kindergarten at all, but I was able to learn. So my mom taught me how to read. Well, and so when I got to first grade, they said, you don't need to take kindergarten. Just go ahead and take first grade because you already know how to read. So it
Hmm.
was
And
it was
I'm sure
fine.
you learn plenty on the farm too. Not standard lessons perhaps, but lots to learn.
Lots to learn, and those years I had to kind of make up for lost time because I spent those first 4 years or so of my life, probably more like first 5 years of my life, laying on a couch. You know, my earliest memories are all wondering about my breathing and laying on the couch and kind of, it was very different. Um, so there was some makeup, but man, I did make up for it in spades. I learned
This
once
is
I was
true.
able to get outside, man, I never wanted to see the inside of never wanted to lay on a couch again. I don't think I really hardly ever have. That's a pretty rare occurrence for me to lay on a couch out of.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, you've been very busy building lots of things over the years and changing lives and uh,
Yeah,
making
very,
make
very
yeah.
happy to do that instead of lay on a couch,
Mhm.
guaranteed. Um, but yeah, and so my health improved, but so did the rest of the family, including my granddad, who had to retire at 55 years old because of heart trouble. Had heart problems, was on, they called it nitroglycerin back then. It was
Mm-hmm.
the current heart drug of the back in the 50s
Mm-hmm.
and 60s. And it, um, he was like, couldn't do anything. And so when we changed the diet, he was reading something and it said, well, a lot of heart disease is due to inflammation. And the best thing to do for inflammation is to eat garlic. So granddad says, well, I guess I can give that a try. So he decided he was going to eat 5 cloves of garlic every day.
Oh my.
And he did. Um, and plus he changed his diet and he got well too. His heart trouble
And
went
you
away.
could tell when granddad was going to enter a room too, I'm sure, with 5 cloves of garlic daily. But that's wonderful.
I don't recall that part, but
Well, I had a
it was
friend.
kind of cool to have a
Yeah,
granddad back, when
yeah,
I was young. He
yeah,
was out ready to take me fishing and stuff, whereas
yeah,
before he couldn't do anything.
yeah. And able to get back on the farm and help keeping it going. And that was one thing you had mentioned in the book, it was definitely a multi-generational farm. And with that, and again, noticing the difference when you changed your diet, and then, you were farming conventionally originally, but then what did you see and your father see happening in agriculture and the food system that made you decide that there had to be a different way than what you were doing at the time?
Well, I mean, there was a couple things that happened pretty similarly. First of all, I mean, we had started on this natural food journey. And so healthy food, whole foods, it wasn't necessarily all organic. That really wasn't a known term at that time. Um, but the idea was, and dad even got to thinking about it. He set aside like a 12-acre parcel of land to grow wheat on. And he even built a little tiny grain bin, held about probably 300 bushel of wheat or something like that, back behind the shop. And he he grew basically organically. He wouldn't put any chemicals on it or anything. This little 12-acre parcel, and he harvested that was and put it in that grain bin. That was our family's wheat. This was like 5 or 6 years before he changed over to organic farming. So in his heart of hearts, he knew about what the chemicals, there was a chance that those were problematic. So he was going to feed his family for friends and family that were going to have our wheat. He
The good
grew it on
stuff.
he grew it on this special little piece of ground over there in the corner, um, on the back 40 that never had any chemicals of any sort. So it was different then. But two things happened. One is one day he was planting and he was up to his armpits and treated wheat, because back in those days you just had boxes that the grain went in that went through what's called grain drills. And so, they would pile up. And so he was just spreading it out with his arm like this. And, it was hot, warm. I mean, this is September usually when you're planting, and it was, 80 degrees or whatever. And he was, you know, in a light t-shirt or whatever, and this stuff was blowing all over. He's no masks, no, nothing. I
Because
mean,
why would you bother, right? It's just seed.
it's just seed, except it was pink seed.
Yeah.
And he got to thinking, hey, I wonder, it's pink because there's some kind of a toxin on it that means you shouldn't be eating the wheat. So they want it to be obvious that you don't eat the wheat. What do we need to do? I should find out what's on this seed. So he calls the seed company and asks them what's on the seed. And They didn't know, so they decided they had to go get an MSDS sheet from the manufacturer. So a few weeks later, I mean, it's after this planting season, they finally get back to him with the MSDS sheet. Turns out that the active ingredient in that seed treatment was primarily just mercury.
Oh, and he was swimming in it.
He was swimming in it.
Oh,
And this was about the time that the knowledge was coming out that mercury was actually settling in people's bodies and very hard to get out and causing nerve damage and things like that. Now we know it's even more than that, but mercury's pretty toxic. And he's like, well, so he writes back to the seed company. This is back in the day before, emails and stuff. And he writes back to the seed company and asks him, well, why are we putting mercury on the wheat? What's the purpose of that? Why does that need to be on the wheat? And so they write back and say, well, it's the primary treatment for smut. Smut is a wheat disease. But the thing is, it only happens in higher rainfall areas. We're in a drier area. Our farm goes from about, on one edge, maybe 14 to 15 inches, and on the other edge, about 9 inches of precipitation a year. Usually smut doesn't even exist under 25 inches of precipitation.
wow.
So now he's putting this toxic stuff on his grain as a seed treatment because the seed company treats all of their wheat with this product, because some of the seed goes into areas that have smut. Now, he never saw smut before when he was treating his seed. He's never seen it. I mean, he had stopped treating seed. That was the last year he ever had treated seed. And we've never seen smut since. So it was treating a disease that doesn't even exist in this ecoclimate. Mm. And the thing is, a lot of the chemicals, that's not an unusual thing. It's like, use food chemicals, use preservatives because it might be high humidity. What if you live in an area that's not high humidity? You still need the preservatives? Not that you should have them anyway, but a lot of times this is just blanket stuff. They're using chemicals and, food additives, still basically chemicals of sorts, that are for things that are not even. It's because we want to create a mass market, ease of marketing in that case, the seed treatment. And then the other thing.
It's like clothing. It's one size fits all, but it doesn't fit anyone well.
That's right. It's not the right approach. We need to be eating healthy food for our family, just like in agriculture, we need to be customizing our agronomy based on the climate and the soil types that we have. And as we got into organic farming, that became more and more and more real. We do all kinds of customization. We're doing testing, very, very frequently, even throughout the season. We're doing what's called sap analysis and stuff like that, because you're customizing it not only to your area and soil type, but to the season and the weather that's happening. So the closer you get to nature, the more you customize it for what we really have, and the less one size fits all there is. But the other thing that he did about that time is he read the book Silent Spring. Mm-hmm. And this was it was written by Rachel Carson back in the 60s. And he was a little bit late to the game. It wasn't a brand new book at the time that he read it. But it was about the dangers of insecticides, i.e. farm chemicals.
Well, farmers have some of the highest, not only like in Rachel Carson's book with the birds and the insects and everything dying off, but farmers have some of the highest rates of cancers of any profession. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's due to these, and it should be the healthiest occupation in the world. Mm-hmm. You're on the soil, you're grounded all the time, you're out in the sunshine, you're doing all the right stuff. But a lot of these folks are absolutely, just like Dad was. They're up to their armpits in these kind of toxic sludges, in his case mercury, and now the whole glyphosate thing is just insane.
Oh, it's everywhere.
And so a lot of farmers are soaking their whole farms with that stuff, and then running their combine through it and watching the dust come up. It's just it's really not surprising that there's health consequences for those things. And yes, statistically that is happening at a huge rate now. So that was when he committed to doing what is now known as organic farming. That was the last time he ever put a conventional fertilizer, herbicide, insecticide, anything on the farm. And that was actually the spring of 1973.
And it didn't go exactly smoothly. I mean, your dad was definitely committed and all in, but there were the typical problems that a lot of transition farms face while the soil gets weaned off the chemicals, because you can't just snap your fingers and have it. Well, basically, the plants become dependent on the chemicals. So you have to reestablish the soil ecosystem and soil structure to get back to that healthy growth. So, what kept you going? And I suppose it was largely just your dad's all-in ethic when your neighbors were complaining about, like, I'm sure I can hear it because I had a neighbor talking about my place one, nothing but weeds, and they couldn't see the good stuff that was coming there as we were switching things over, and dealing with things like volcanic eruptions because you all went through Mount St. Helens, and IRS raids because the IRS always so helpful there for the citizens, and all the rest of it. What kept you all going through that?
Well, primarily it was faith and purpose. Hey, we knew, because of our own family's health, that this stuff was super important. And some of it was more dramatic than others. I mean, obviously the IRS thing was a huge point of drama in our life. St. Helens, probably not as much. That was, in
It was
some
only a
ways,
volcano.
it was a fun experience in some ways, and a little bit scary in some ways. I mean, I guess everyone who experienced it was a little bit scared. I can't say anybody was, when the sky turns dark and starts snowing sand. That's just a little different. But
A little bit, just a little bit.
yeah, a little bit. But it really wasn't. I mean, it wasn't traumatic in the sense, that the IRS was, or even working with the neighbors when we had, and that was much later. Early on with the neighbors, we had really good neighbors at the original farm in Doofer. The neighbors were great, and and truthfully, and the biggest neighbor is the one I had worked for. So he was, he was always real friendly, and it was like he never gave us any kind of hard time about the weeds and stuff like that. Some of the neighbors a little further away said, "Oh, that crazy guy up on the hill," right? Because we're one of the highest farms. Our farm goes down the hill, kind of in the foothills of Mount Hood. So we're one of the last farms before it gets into the forest there. And so they would say, "Yeah, the crazy guy up on the hill who, um, is probably going to go broke anytime because he doesn't bother to fertilize," and things like that, right? But we didn't get a lot of blowback. Now that was a very different story when we're over in Sherman County, because over there's a lot of a lot of farmers have a very, I would say, in my opinion at least, a perverted sense of pride in the way their fields look. So if there is a weed in your field, then that's like a mar on your character or something. You're a bad farmer
Yes.
because you allowed a weed into your crop. Nature never grows anything in a fully monocrop system.
Mm-hmm.
That is completely against nature. So in order to get, especially once you're using the anhydrous ammonia and all of that kind of stuff, the ability to get a monocrop to grow appropriately. And I'm not saying we don't do monocrops too. We do. I mean, it's very hard to grow grain without doing a monocrop at least 1 year at a time. Hopefully we're rotating those crops and never doing it back to back. So we're like doing, you know, some biodiversity there, but we're not doing it the same year because how do you harvest your grain crop or whatever? Now, if you're doing animals or pasture, or, you know, fruit trees or a lot of other things, you do not have to monocrop that way. But in the case of grain, you pretty much do.
Yeah,
And
just for the logistics of harvesting it, it just really doesn't work well at scale any other way.
it doesn't. I mean, we've tried a few things. I mean, we've grown peas and wheat together, you know, and but it's an extra step, and you have to clean it apart. A pea is much bigger than wheat, so it gets, you know, it's really hard to set your combine just right. You know, all those kinds of things. So it's not impossible. There is ways to do biodiversity in your field, but none of them are super easy. But anyway, there's quite a sense of pride in that, and so we ended up having a situation where the neighbors actually got together and petitioned the county against us for having weeds in our field. Um, you know, obviously there's no statute that you can't have weeds in your field, but they were complaining that the weeds were going onto their fields,
Mm-hmm.
even though, or the weed seeds rather, were blowing onto their fields,
Mm-hmm.
even though, you know, they never one time showed us a situation where there was any likelihood that a weed was growing on their land because it came from ours.
Yeah, they probably didn't understand the whole concept that most weed seeds can lay dormant in the soil for decades and then only emerge when the conditions are right. So they had absolutely no need for seeds from you because the seeds were
They
just
had them.
waiting there. Yep, they're covered.
Yeah.
So,
No, especially that what they call the noxious weeds that, you know, they were so concerned about. Things like morning glory or bindweed. You
mhm.
look that up. That particular weed seed can easily stay in the soil for a century.
Yeah, it's just there.
According to modern science. I mean, that's what.
Yeah, yeah. And we normally don't have a problem with it, but we've had an unusually dry year here in Northeast Wisconsin. And this year we have bindweed. But normally we don't see it in the gardens just because it just needs those specific conditions and we don't have them. But we did, and it's here. Boom.
And that can happen. And, you know, and those conditions are typically, there's a couple weeds, like, and bindweed's one of them, that the conditions are typically pretty good for here. That's one of the
Mhm.
weeds that kind of likes to be around.
Mhm.
Um, but it wasn't, but those are little black heavy seeds. The chances of that getting across the neighbor's
Yeah,
fence
they're,
is
they're they're not blowing like
really,
dandelion puffs.
it's not dandelion puffs, right? Very, very hard for those to get to a neighbor. But anyway, they were super concerned about it. I don't think they were concerned about the bindweed. They were really just concerned that when their buyers or whatever drove through the county, they see these weedy fields that are, at least in their mind, weedy fields that are not too far from their fields. And, you know, it wasn't really, they just lumped onto things that actually have some statutes around them, things defined as noxious weeds. If they're not defined as noxious, there's no statute, at least in the state of Oregon, that you can do anything about it. We could actually be growing weeds for a crop, and there's nothing, the neighbor or the county could do about it unless it's defined as a noxious weed. So they picked on ones that absolutely made no sense, but it was just because they saw that there were weeds in our field. But the crazy thing is, I mean, you never, as the soil improves, and that was pretty early in the process there for that ground. So that's ground that we got later, not the original farm. It takes a while, and the weeds grow pretty good right at first until the soil begins to get in balance. Weeds are there as soil does not like to live in a vacuum. It does not like to be bare. It hates being bare. And nature tries to fill up bare ground every time, all the time. And while it's doing it, it finds the things that will help the soil to recover. So if you see deficiencies or excesses in the soil, weeds will come in to try to pull out those excesses or run deep roots in to try to pull up the deficiencies.
Yep, and I actually put together for the home gardener a little course on that, know your weeds and get rid of them without all the chemicals, because that's it. We've been in this place here for over 20 years now, and I can see the progression in the soil and things that were generally or big problems early on. Now it's just not. They just disappear as you heal the soil. It just changes completely, and things will show up, but it's much easier to manage them as your soil gets healthier.
Yeah, and it's never completely weed free. The
No.
thing is, even in the grain crops, I mean, you might not even see a lot of weeds, but you will see occasional weeds. But if you dig in, once the soil is healthier, you dig in, the weeds are all there. The crop just outcompetes it.
Yep.
So it's not that we're now weed free. The weeds are, well, they're little tiny things, and the crop is grown way over it. They're still there. A lot of them probably went to seed. There's more seeds in the soil that'll last for more years. If the soil ever gets out of balance, it's back. And that's true of good grasses and stuff too. I mean, wild grasses, sometimes if you get the soil in the right situation, I know Joel Saladin teaches on that a lot. He says, oh, I never planted a seed one on my pastures. It's all wild grasses that came back because we treated our soil better. And
we've got the same situation here too. I mean, we were down to naked dirt during construction, and then things just grew. And some we mowed, some we left wild, and now it looks like a lawn. Good enough. It wouldn't pass the homeowners association back in the suburbs, but it works for us.
Yeah, the grasses, there are certain grasses that will come in on their own. And will it look like that manicured lawn? No, probably not. But even your manicured lawn, even if you're planting that, if you're not using any chemicals, there are certain things like the good old dandelions that nature wants to have grow because we need them. And so having a few dandelions in your yard is a very healthy thing. And it's the same in our fields. If we're so worried about that one dandelion, I mean, they're not stickery or anything else. Why is a dandelion such a big deal in somebody's yard, in the suburbs or wherever you happen to be? Is it really a problem? Some people think it's a real big problem. In my book, hey, I would 1,000 times rather have the dandelion than the Agent Orange that's in the weed and feed that they use to control those dandelions.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, we eat them, we turn them into medicine. I make wine occasionally, and all from the bumper dandelion crop that we get around here. Just like you said, they serve they hold that niche in the ecosystem. They're there for a purpose.
They do, and as the season progresses, they basically kind of go back. So early in the spring, at least in our country, they're pretty
Hmm.
dominant. And as the season progresses, pretty soon you don't even know they're there. They're really tiny and the grass is growing fine.
Hmm.
And then next spring, they're all back. It's like,
Yep.
that's the thing, you get some dandelions in the spring in the cool, cool part of the year.
Hmm.
But those are things that happen in organic farms. The things they don't understand, that the neighbors don't understand, and a few of them are starting to understand it. But from an economic standpoint, if you're in agriculture, our field with that crop that has some weeds in it is worth 3 or 4 or 5 times as much as their crop is, because they're growing something no, and we're growing something and needs badly. So in our fields, we're often growing ancient grains, for instance, growing spelt and einkorn and coruscant and these kinds of ancient grains. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that really can't handle traditional wheat anymore.
Well,
They,
the modern grains, yeah.
that's what I mean. Modern, I shouldn't
Yeah.
say traditional, but
No, I'm just trying to, yeah,
conventional wheat.
yep,
I should have said
yep, yep.
conventional. They can't handle conventional wheat. So they're going back to organically produced einkorn and coruscant and emmer and spelt and those kinds of things. And those things are not bothering their digestive
Mm.
systems. They are creating a nutrient that's fully, we should not be allergic to wheat per se. That's like silly. I mean, wheat built civilizations. We've been eating wheat as a species for at least 4 to 5 thousand
Hmm.
years, according to historians,
Hmm.
maybe longer.
Hmm.
And there was no civilization before there was wheat. Wheat was what started civilizations. I mean, it was wheat and lentils. It's like, we shouldn't be allergic to it, but we are. And it's not because it's wheat, it's because of the farming practices and the hybridization that's been done in the wheat world. Um, so, in our fields, we're growing spelt or, fill in the blank, any of those ancient grains. And and that crop, even though it's got a few weeds in it, and the yield may not look like it's quite as big as their modern wheat, the economic benefit to the farm is astronomically higher than what their fields are. And
And there's
that's,
also the consideration of the nutrient value of the crop too, because I think that's a very serious problem that we've got more than enough calories for everyone, but we're not getting the nutrients. And I know I've looked at, I don't know if you're familiar with Matt Power's work, and he was
oh,
crunching
yes.
some of the numbers, looking how much the nutrient values have dropped in so many crops. And it's fruits and vegetables and grains, but also meat and dairy. They don't even have the nutrient value that they used to decades ago. And
Well, it's factory fed, chickens and pigs and whatever off of GMO
mhm,
corn and soy. How could they
yeah.
have the same?
And I think that's the thing a lot of people don't understand, that they look, even when they go to the grocery store, and I want the big product. I want the big shiny clean product with, and it's like, well, that big thing may just be plumped up with excess water. It was grown fast with with chemicals, and it didn't have time to form those symbiotic relationships in the soil that are what actually bring in the micronutrients that are what we really need to be completely nourished and satisfied. So we eat more because we're hungry, because we're not getting the nutrients, and we keep on that vicious cycle. And then, then they're selling the
Uh-huh.
wonder drugs like Ozempic and so forth because, well, people are
Because there's
overweight.
obesity going
Yeah,
on.
and
Yeah.
it's like, and we just it's being on this hamster wheel round and round, and it just drives me crazy, as you might have guessed. But
Oh, yes, it is. But big ag and big pharma and all that is a lot of interrelational ownership and stuff in that space. So, Bayer Aspirin owns the largest chemical company in the US.
yeah, a little bit of nepotism there, just hand in hand. And then there's the revolving door to the regulatory agencies that are supposed to be overseeing, Fox, Hen House. Okay. That's been that way for decades, so that's nothing new. It's just still frustrating for those who are pushing for alternatives. So the family farm, you're growing the healthier crops, and then you're marketing the healthier crops. And then how did that evolve into what became Azure Standard?
Okay. Well, back in the day, when I first figured out that I needed to find the people who cared about the quality food that were willing to pay for it and not just take my stuff and mix it in with all the other wheat or grain or whatever I was doing. So I started doing these little delivery routes basically just in the pickup originally. And it wasn't, I wasn't maybe a year or so in, and I started, because I was going like to Eastern Washington and well, I am kind of in Eastern Oregon anyway, but I was doing like Eastern Washington to Seattle, Eastern Oregon, like we're North Central Oregon. We go down to Bend and over to Eugene and back up to Portland, and pretty soon I started having people in these more rural communities, particularly, start asking me, "Hey, can you stop in Portland and pick me up some nuts or some seeds or some grain, some rice, or you can do it, at this place or that place or whatever." And so I was saying, "Oh, okay, yeah, no problem. I'm driving through there. I can stop and get you that and haul it out there the next week to them." And after doing that for a while, it suddenly dawned in my thick head that, hey, there is probably a need in these rural communities for a little bit better quality food. There's always plenty of Doritos and Pepsi,
They have
but
a shelf life of forever.
but the ability to get, raw almonds and, cashews and good non-oiled raisins is a little bit um, sketchy. And back then, it even wasn't even all organic. We did a little bit of organics, but it was very limited in the organics that were available. This is back in, you know, so this would have been in 87. And so it finally dawned in my thick brain that there was a need for this. I figured, well, I guess I may as well kind of create this little food co-op. It'd be good in our community. And so there was a couple people in the community that were interested in it. And said, well, I'll bring some stuff from Portland and whatever and sell it here locally in Doofer. But, I'll go ahead and put a little catalog together that any place that I'm driving anyway, they can order a few things out of the catalog. So it was 3 pieces of paper folded over, and I did it on a typewriter. My wife and I, we'd just gotten married. I was kind of a newlywed at the time, and she was like, oh, okay. And so we typed it up on this typewriter basically, and had a friend draw a little logo for the cover, and did it on a copy machine and stapled it and sent it out, right? And this was our first Azure catalog. And that was also the first time we ever used the name Azure as a part of our identification. Before
So do
that,
you have a copy of that original? Or is that long
I
since
do.
disappeared?
That's long since disappeared. I do have a really early one. It wasn't the very first one, but I do have one from year one. But yeah,
Changed it just a little bit over the years, I'll bet. Just a little.
yeah. Now it's actually 7 catalogs that are like each one an inch to a half inch to an inch thick, and if I stack them all up, it's like
Hmm.
3 inches, right, of the paper stacked together instead of 3 pages. But it's yeah, changed a lot. But that's kind of how Azure grew, because you know people that saw those things, they would ask for other things, and I would get them, and pretty soon, I learned a couple of the other small distributors went out of business in the area, and I tell some of those stories in the book.
Hmm.
But and that was how we grew a little bit faster early on. And then we really grew up, I guess, from just kind of a local company to running around to a larger area, mostly just the Northwest, but Oregon, Washington, Idaho, we did a little bit in Montana and in Northern California. That was in 98, 99. And at that time, there was a lot of folks thinking that there was going to be some major problems with the computer systems when we are,
Y2K scare. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. So, and I never advertised, I didn't even think of it, but there were quite a few. I mean, talk radio was the thing back in those days.
Hmm.
And there were quite a few talk show hosts, maybe a half a dozen of them, that somehow found out about Azure and were saying, hey, if you want to be more of a do-it-yourselfer in storing up food, which they were all recommending, of course. I mean, and they
Hmm.
were advertising for these people were selling these,
The
freeze-dried
disaster
meals and all
kits
that.
and
Yeah, all
yeah.
those kinds of things. But if you want to be a do-it-yourselfer and be a little smarter about it, you can just buy the grain and beans and seeds and stuff from Azure, and put it in your own buckets and mylar bags and stuff like that, and rotate your stock and whatever.
Yeah,
It's
and you
like,
get
so
food you actually use and eat anyway, and then at a much better price.
you do well, and some people even then bought stuff they don't use. I can't tell you how many people a couple years later wanted to sell me their wheat back, and I said, well, why do you want to sell your wheat back? Well, I don't have a grinder. But they
Why did you buy
stored
wheat?
up 10 buckets of wheat and don't even have a grinder.
Well, guess what? Grinders are pretty affordable, especially if you get a manual one. And even the powered ones aren't that bad. I mean, if they've got 10 buckets of wheat. So, yeah. And the flavor, it's worth it. They should get a grinder.
They should get a grinder. That's right.
Yep.
But I guess they don't want to bake bread either. I don't know. But I had a lot of
People,
people want
people.
to send the wheat back. No, once you put it in a bucket and stuff, I'm not really going to be able to take the wheat
No,
back and
no.
sell it to somebody else. That doesn't
No.
work very well, but not after a couple years. But anyway. So, but yeah. And so my uncle he was an independent trucker. And so I talked him into coming and trucking for us. And that was the beginning of the Azure logistics system. And then we had a big truck. We had wheels, and so I wasn't having to drive it in a van. And for a little while, we had uh,
Yeah,
a little
I can picture that.
Mercedes delivery truck. Now we have a real truck. And so that's after that, we created the routes and stuff like that made it very more predictable. I was already kind of doing routes, but it was kind of whenever the stores and co-ops and stuff needed it. But now we put together schedules. Hey, you can buy whatever you want on this truck, and that was, and then about that time, a little before that, I was delivering like to every home, and there was one gal. She was referring a lot of folks to Azure at the time, and it's like, you know, Martha, I'm not sure I can make that many stops because I'm still farming. I got to get home. I got 2 days a week on the road and 5 days a week to farm. I mean, which cuts into your farm time pretty good. And says, "Oh, don't worry about it, honey. Just drop everybody's stuff at my house, and they'll all come pick it up. We know each other. It's like, oh, good." And that was kind of where the drop point concept started. So
Mhm.
after she started doing it, then when I started getting that in other areas, I would suggest it. Hey,
Yeah.
be a really good idea if we all, everybody picked up over at your place instead of, oh yeah. And very few people had a problem with that. So that's kind of how the drop point system got started. So that was pretty early on. That was back in the mid to late 90s when we started doing the drop point
Yeah. I
concept.
just finalized my order yesterday, and it'll be in next week. I think we're on kale row now. So
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think we moved because Lily got so big, we moved some of the Lily onto kale. But um,
So some of the things that you ran into with the growth of Azure, different challenges that you ran into that you had to work through, like warehouse fire and the debt load, and coming into 2020 and the COVID lockdowns and whatnot. Maybe can you share a little bit about that? Some of those challenges, and then how you got through it.
well, the biggest challenge that we ended up having was not one that was huge fanfare. It didn't seem, I mean, it wasn't like COVID or something that everybody knew about. It was a it was a legislation that took place back in the mid like 2015, 2016 era called the Food Modernization Act,
Oh
FISMA.
yeah.
I don't know if very many of your readers have heard of that, but and really small growers, most of them are accepted from a lot of those provisions, but we weren't that. We were big enough. We were too small to comply and too big to be exempt. And it put us in an extremely difficult position. And so we ended up having to, so it kind of stacked up. We had to rewrite a whole bunch of software to comply with the Food Modernization Act. I got, and I wasn't in the software business up to that point at all. So I went out to a software vendor and said, "Hey, can you do this for us?" And they finally okay, it's going to be about $1 million project to do this. That was an extremely big hit for us at the time. That was big, but it was going to take about a year, and so we would be paying this over about a year's time. And then we would have the new software, and we were going to have a little better website as a part of this package, a little bit more user-friendly website, because that's the same time frame that website usability was growing. There was becoming new standards. Amazon and so on, they were setting standards all the time of what people expect when you're on a shopping site, right? So so it was both of those together, but primarily it was the Food Modernization Act because of the tracking and those kinds of things that had to be done after that. And we weren't doing any of that. I mean, we were very rudimentary before that. And so, and it went into that. So the year went by and we'd paid the $1 million and they kept wanting more because they weren't quite done. It was a little bit more. There was some scope creep, so on. They kept saying a little bit more. Oh, we need some experts to do this and that. So our money was rapidly being depleted and we had no software and we're still out of compliance and we have no new website. And this is all and this was going on and on. So they were supposed to be done in December. Um, by mid-spring, I was getting desperate. And then, but it put us in an absolute economic bind because it's like, well, I got to finish this software. I don't have a choice. Government's mandating it. Plus, I've already spent $1 million on it. If I start over with some other vendor, now where will I be? And they claim they're only a couple weeks out. Let's pay another, X amount.
When I read this section in your book, because I read part of this aloud to my husband because he works in IT, and he was just getting red faced on your behalf. He's like, no, no, don't do it. But please
So
continue. Sorry.
have
Yeah.
there ever, has he seen operators that do that kind of stuff?
Oh
And
gosh, yes, yes, yes. That yeah, with over he was in IT for over 20 years, so yeah, he's seen it all, and yeah, very
yeah,
much empathize with situations like that.
so we kept burning through our operating capital trying to get this done, and now I can't pay vendors on time, and and pretty soon it's like this self-perpetuating downward spiral because running a truck, if it's full or half full, it costs the same amount to run, pretty much. Not much difference. You're hiring the driver, you're paying the fuel. I mean, the fuel mileage isn't much different if it's half or full. And so it becomes increasingly inefficient. And so we start losing really bleeding, bleeding cash between the software and not being able to make as much money because we don't have all the products, and
Yeah,
we're
and it just
late.
mushrooms because you're stuck.
Yeah,
You've got those obligations and the other obligations, and the first obligations don't go away because the second obligations, and then you're stuck in the middle.
we're stuck in the middle. So I figured, well, I can get a little cash infusion. Let me go see if I can get a loan. If I could get $1 million loan just to cover stuff right now, we could probably weather this thing. So I worked for months, and we get almost all the way to the finish line, and then they just say no. Sorry. Yeah,
Well,
we're
I
not
know
doing
you
it.
mentioned you hadn't been taking out loans because you've been doing everything, paying everything off immediately. So you didn't have that big credit record because you hadn't been doing business that way. So yeah.
No, we hadn't. I mean, and I know a lot of farmers do that. They take on operating loans and so on, but that had not been our family tradition. We always saved enough from the year before to put in next year's crop. That was just the way you did it. And so we didn't have operating loans and we didn't have all that stuff. So, yeah, when we get to the bank, there's no credit history. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they just want to look, oh, what's your tax return look like? Well, I mean, they didn't want to look at anyone but the last one. The last one already shows a loss because of
Because
all
you've
the
been
stuff
dealing with
that's
a
going
software
on.
company.
Yeah, and the decreased sales because we're out of stock of a whole bunch of stuff. And then, but they don't want to look at the 5 years before that would have showed the profits. Oh no. So
Yeah, a
they
healthy
say, oh,
growing
you're
company. Oh no, can't
you're
look at
not
that.
credit you're not credit worthy because after all, you lost money last year. Oh, well, if I hadn't lost money, I wouldn't need you. That's
Yeah,
what.
exactly. It's like, why? Yeah, but
So two things happened that I think were both providential. One is I ended up, and I tell this story I think in the book too. I ended up on missing an airplane. Ended up on an airplane with somebody that I never should have met. Um, and turns out that she's the wife of a software engineer um, that specialized in all the exact technology that all of our new stuff was being written in. And it was kind of like, and so I ended up delaying my trip back and met with her husband, the software engineer, at a church down in LA. And they were wanting, the reason they were on the plane is, or she was on the plane is because she was up looking for property in Oregon because they wanted to move to Oregon
Mhm.
from Los Angeles. So it's like, so he was planning to change jobs and all that anyway. So we talked a little bit and talked about the mission and the vision and what Azure's about. And I was not, I didn't tell any lies about our economic situation. Talked about that too. And long story short, he ended up deciding to come work for Azure. I offered him a job, um, probably at a loss from his previous engineering gig, but he's a believer, still is. He's still a part of the Azure team to this day. But so finally, he gets in there and he actually can look at the code and see what they actually have, because they keep telling me, yeah, we're 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever. This is like, but we need another 50 grand to get that last 2 weeks done. And, that'd been going on for 6 or 8 months. And he finally gets in there and he looks at it and he says, yeah, nah, not even close. You're at least 6 months out.
Yeah,
this is not 2 weeks. This is 6 months. They don't have this and this and this, and they don't have the server, the database is not set up yet, and this and that, and it's like all this stuff. And it's like,
yeah, that was 26 and 27.
Yeah. So this was so anyway, he came to work for Azure. We ended up still using the contractor, but we told him we only wanted like these 2 people, because he could somehow in the back see who wrote the good code and the bad code.
He could read the code signatures, and again, I know that kind of stuff because this is things my husband has contended with in the past. So yeah, you can tell it's like reading handwriting in the code kind of.
So he had like these 10 people we were paying, and like 2 of them had done all the work that had
those guys.
These 2 people over here. All the rest apparently had been getting paid to, I don't know, play solitaire or something, because they didn't write much code if any. So
or it was the code that wasn't working particularly well. That was dragging out your project for far too long.
Could be, and it had to get rewritten or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what was going on, because it was behind the curtain, right? This was a contractor that, I didn't have direct.
You're a farmer and a business owner. You're not a coder, and that's a problem that is really unfortunately common. And it's like these people who do this software and whatnot, they hold the keys because you don't know what you don't know. So yeah, you're definitely not the only business owner to ever get in a jam like that. It's far too common.
But now I have somebody I can trust. And so it was just about 5 or 6 months, like he thought. And he was working on it too now, along with these 2 guys that actually had written good code. And it was just about 5 or 6 months before we actually were able to launch. And it was still a little buggy when we launched. I told him to launch as soon as we could anyway, and fix stuff as we went, so it was a little bit traumatic doing it, but it wasn't terrible. It was fine. But anyway, but since then, after that, we basically, we created our own software department here at Azure. We really have not used contractors.
Outside contractors, yeah.
So David, he ended up he's our senior coder now, the guy that I was talking about, but we hired somebody to manage the department, and there's today it's grown quite a bit, but we have like 7 or 8 software engineers here at Azure now. So that's now become a part of the core Azure, part of what we do here at Azure is we code, not just code, but we engineer our own software. Coding is actually today done mostly by AI, but the engineering is certainly not. That's
another discussion. But the thing of that with the AI is basically the AI is only as good as the code that it starts with, and so it's not an innovator in most cases, and it can't, keeping software engineers, when you got critical systems you need to run, you should have your own people to make sure they stay running. I mean, at least that's my perspective on it.
No, that's absolutely correct. We need, not necessarily coders, we need engineers. Not that they don't know how to code, they do, but but these are the ones that know about the, the systems, what it takes for all the technology to run properly. So that is now internal. But in the meantime, so that was one thing that happened. So we actually got some momentum, and we had an end in sight for that bleeding. It took almost another year, so we bled a lot more by the end of that year, but not as much as we were bleeding before, because we weren't paying all the ones that didn't have any useful code.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing is, one of our customers came to us and said, hey, because we were out of stock on a lot of stuff, and they said, hey, I just flipped a house. What if I invested in the yogurt? What if I bought the yogurt for you and you would just sell it, and you could just pay me a little bit, pay me back as you sell it with maybe a little return of some sort? It's like, well, I don't know how that would work, but got my wheels to turning. And so because we couldn't borrow from a bank, I couldn't get any financing of any sort. And we were still, I was way behind on our vendors. So, a lot of them were shipping as behind as they were getting paid. So there was gaps all over the place. And so it got me thinking, well, I wonder if there's other customers that would be interested in doing that or be willing to do that. And so it was a very humbling experience, because first of all, I had to go out to our customers and basically ask them if they could help Azure stay afloat. I wasn't about to, I had people recommend not telling the truth about it, but I disagreed with that. From the very beginning, we basically told the customers exactly what was going on. We were right on the door of bankruptcy. I don't know for sure if I can make it, but our only chance of making it is to have product in stock. And here's a program. So I'd pay them 2% per turn. So they would buy, you can't sell shares, or you can't borrow money from non-banking institutes legally because of securities laws and things like that. So I can't let customers invest directly in Azure or do personal loans or anything like that. That's not legal. But there isn't any law saying that we can't sell their inventory on consignment. That's perfectly legal. So we basically created a massive consignment program where customers, and we put a process in place for that. And over the course of that next year, so that was I think we launched that in the spring of 2018, was when that started.
Mm-hmm.
And it took about a year to really get full momentum on that, but we ended up raising about $3 million with that program. Worth of.
And you had inventory again.
So yes, we had inventory again, but it wasn't that simple, because we owed all the vendors money. So I had to call every vendor and say, hey, I need this old debt set aside, and I need you to let me prepay for new inventory, because they all wanted the money. But it would have done no good if I'd have raised the $3 million and just paid off all the debt. I still wouldn't have had any money, because everyone's putting us on prepay anyway. So I had to go to every vendor and negotiate, hey, if we're going to survive and you're going to get your money and you're going to continue, profitable sales with Azure, here's what needs to happen. And almost all of them did it. There was a handful that refused to do it, but the vast majority, we set the old debt aside over here, and we said, okay, and we'll make some kind of token payment on it. We'll make some kind of token payment, but there can't be interest, and you have to let us take that, and we promise to continue to buy from you using this money from the vendors, or from what we call customer sponsored inventory, from the customers. Yeah. So by basically 2019, we finally had inventory, and we finally had our first profitable year in about 5 years of bleeding cash. Now, it wasn't much of a profitable year. I saw that trajectory in 2019. I still saw that trajectory going out. It's going to take me 10 years to dig out of this hole. But, maybe 15, but at least, it's
At least there was a
maybe it's
path
going to be,
forward.
at least there was a path forward. It wasn't completely hopeless. So we'll have to be very, very careful, but at least there's a path forward. But we
And
had
then
inventory. Yeah, a couple things happened. I mean, one, and this is what, I know COVID ended up happening the following March, but just a month before that, I called special prayer with our family. And in many ways, I think that was a turning point in our attitudes. And this was all the family members that were a part of it. And there had been a lot of division in the family. It's hard when, they don't see the whole picture, even though you try to explain it. Well, why did you let ourselves get in this situation? Why are we in debt to all these vendors?
oh, when stress
Why?
goes up, there's always plenty of blame to go around. Always. It just
So,
is human nature.
so it's like, and so we did that as a greater family. All the families that are involved in Azure, I should say, our greater family. And so we spent pretty much a full day. We went and drove around to every Azure location, every farm, warehouse, and we individually prayed over every single one, and asked, basically, hey, if this should be what we're doing, you know, make it prosperous, and if it's not, let's to see the path of exiting gracefully. And and then about 6 weeks later, we have March of 2020. I think it was like March 12th or 13th or something like that. President Trump goes out and says, "We're shutting the nation down." Hey. And I didn't think anything of it. I thought this was some political thing from Washington, D.C. How's it affect me? Doesn't matter to me. I mean, I know about immune systems and these kinds of things. I mean, I'm not worried about COVID. It's like, I don't. So that's kind of the way I saw it up to that point. And then my
Then the world
nephew
went a little crazy.
went a little crazy, and that weekend, my nephew, he ends up calling me on Sunday afternoon, and I'm just out working in the garden. Like, Sundays, a lot of times I'm, not at work. I'm, working on the farm, or in this case, I was in the garden that day for whatever reason. And it's like, have you seen what's going on? And we had taken more orders that weekend than we had taken in the previous 2.5 months. Our website just got absolutely inundated. I mean, UPS orders, truck route orders, everything just went huge quantities of orders. And it's like, apparently nobody wanted to go to a grocery store anymore, and they thought it was a great idea to get stuff at a drop out in the open air. All of a sudden.
Yep.
So anyway, that was when Azure really started an upward trajectory. And crazily enough, we had all the debts were paid off by June. I thought it was going to take 10 years. It took 3 months because of this huge influx of orders. And the other thing is, I had just talked to all these vendors. I had, become on first name basis with almost everybody, talking about this situation.
Told them we're in for the long haul because this is going to take a while. Yep.
Going to take a while. So then we were very much at the top of the list. So we had product when nobody else did. So we were able to sell product, we're talking about in April and May and June. I mean, our warehouse cleared out really, really fast. But
so did the store shelves, and they didn't get restocked. I remember that was just such a surreal time, going in and seeing shells stripped, and just, something I never really thought about or even considered before all that unfolded.
um, so yeah, it
And
was.
yeah, we keep a pretty good, you know, we're out in the country and, prep for blizzards and things and whatnot. And of course, do a lot of home food preservation. So it really didn't impact us a lot, but I know others who don't shop the same way. We're like, oh, what are we gonna do? So,
Yeah, it was a big deal for a lot of folks.
mhm,
So, um, but we also had this huge trajectory, and this is right when we kind of have a labor crisis at the same time. During the COVID thing, a lot of people were being paid not to work. Um, so, if one person came down with tested positive for COVID, not even if they didn't even come down with it,
mhm.
everyone that they had been around had to take 10 days off of work and stay at home and all this stuff. And now we have this huge growth of orders. And I tell you, that's when we ended up having the family pitch in, everyone from the littlest kids all the way. Um, in order to get the orders out, we were working nights and weekends and that kind of thing when the regular crew is there during the day, and maybe at a pared down rate, but it was really hard to build extra crew during that time frame because um, and
Everything
it
was so
wasn't just.
restrictive and what was allowed and not allowed, or at least highly encouraged or discouraged for business activities. I know my husband, um, he worked for a local county at that point in time, and they had switched nearly everyone to remote work that could be. And so, he's scrambling to, try and get all the logistics sorted out for everyone to, telecommute and that possibly could. And that was, its own challenge too. And it was just so surreal. And so yeah, I
Pulling
can
orders in a
empathize.
warehouse, pulling orders in a warehouse is not something that can be done remotely.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yes, customer service and stuff, but we'd already been doing that remotely for a long time, so that didn't
Yeah.
affect us in that sense. Um, but you can't pull orders and you can't drive truck remotely. Those are not things that
Hmm.
work. So yeah, so that was when the family we had to absolutely kick in, do whatever it took. I can't tell you how many mornings we started at 7 o'clock in the morning and went till midnight or past to get those trucks out the door, somewhat on time at least.
Hmm.
But at least now, there was an end in sight. So that was probably, you talk about the disasters. That was our hardest one by far, and was the was the financial and FISMA thing. Um, but it is so much easier to have those physical demands than the emotional and psychological ones of, you know, staring down bankruptcy. Working you know, um, 20-hour days is one thing, and you can do that for a while.
Well, you mentioned that. Obviously, you've been doing what you've been doing from starting on the farm to building the nationwide expansion of Azure. And so there's been so many changes during this time period. What are the things that you think help make your family, your farm, and your whole business in the greater Azure community more resilient to help you get through these difficult time periods? Because obviously it wasn't easy. So, what's the foundation of your resilience and determination?
Purpose, purpose, and faith. I mean, what's the reason? Why are we doing what we're doing? Um, in our case, and I have to, I define that. I talk about it a lot. We're here to inspire healthy and abundant living. That's what we've been put on the earth to do. That's our goal and our mission. Not that it may not change someday, but right now, that's it. And so anything that we do that's toward that goal is positive use of our time. Anything that's not towards that goal is not positive use of our time. And so having that purpose, knowing that it works, because it certainly has worked in our family, and many others in the greater Azure community. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of, turnaround stories.
And I'm
That,
going to mention this. I'm going to mention your book again, and you do go into, I won't call it quite fire and brimstone speech, but you're very passionate engineering about what you do and why you do it, and I really identify with that, or empathize with that, and because it really is, as you've mentioned, purpose. A life without purpose. I've just seen too many cases of people going into retirement and then they lose that purpose. And then, either they pass away or their quality of life greatly declines. And I think that's something that's just often skipped over in society. I mean, is that a way to put it? Because, we talk about pursuit of, well, okay, I want to be healthy or I want to be rich or famous or whatever. But I think too, as a part of your purpose is giving back to the community, and the act of service and giving is more than just obtain. It balances out the obtaining. I'm not saying this very well, but servant leadership is something that my husband used to talk about a lot, and I think that is really a critical component of what your organization stands for. You're not just, it's not a get rich quick scheme, certainly, because yeah, but it is
yeah,
acts of
I
service.
wouldn't be choosing organic farming and food distribution if it was a get rich scheme. I might be in,
No.
all the money's being made in technology and finance right now. I mean, over that period of time, not where I'm at. But no, it's about purpose, and that's what has gotten us through this. And I don't like to necessarily call it giving back per se. We need to serve our communities and the communities that we work in all the time. A lot of companies, they say, "Oh, I'm giving back." And they basically are stealing from the community, and then they say, "Oh, well, I'll support the little league baseball team, so I'm giving back." Well, that's not really what we're looking at. We want to give back all the time. We want to give a great value, but the real value that I want to see is healthier families, healthier children, a healthier community with those that are our customers. That's the side effect that we want to have. And we also, part of our mission is to make it as affordable as possible. So especially for those that are raising families, um, we offer substantial bulk discounts throughout the Azure, product list, unlike almost any other company that's in this space. This is very unusual in this space, but because I believe in it, I believe that it's very important that families, especially those that are really trying to take care of their families and cook at home and get the best possible ingredients, can do that on a budget. There's a lot of one income families that are trying to raise their kids. They're in that stage of life of raising families, and maybe, you know, you're having to live on one income right now and feed a few extra mouths. And that's the future of America. Those kids and families that are being raised right now. And the healthier that those brains go into society, the better society we're going to be living in the future. And I think that that's a big part of the Azure mission. We want healthier families, and to support that every way we can.
And along those lines, um, you called your book Seeds of Hope. And if you had to tell people, one thing that you would suggest that they tackle to help individuals build, healthier, more resilient futures, what would you suggest? Not from a business concept, but, what would you tell your customers? You know, where would you say people should start?
Well, I believe that diet is one of the easiest ones to start with. There's more to health than just diet. But, and I'm going to be the first to tell you that diet is not 100% of it, but it is a big part of it. There is also, there's two other major pieces to health, and diet, I also include in that the environmental toxins. So we're dealing with, the toxins that are in the food we eat, but also in the cleaning products we use and the lotions and potions that people
Mhm.
put on their skins
And the
or in
clothes
their.
we wear. And I was looking through the sales this month. You have some absolutely gorgeous organic cotton fabrics, which I was very happy to see. Even though I'm not a sewer, I have friends who sew, so I was sending pictures of the fabric and like, oh, you got to check out and see, for your sewing projects.
And our goal is within the next year to have a full line of organic clothing as well.
Oh, wow.
That is in the works. It's not ready
Well, that's
yet.
great because I don't
Um,
sew, so
but
I would be
but
the
real
customer for the
clothes. I
clothing.
mean, there's some organic stuff, but they're like these sloppy chemises and some undergarments and stuff. But I want to have real organic clothes, like polo shirts and jeans and stuff like that people actually wear,
Mhm.
not sweatshirts, these kinds of things that are not. You can occasionally get an organic T-shirt or something, but they're usually some advertising, kind of a thing. So anyway, that is in the
Yeah,
Azure
it is
on the
really
Azure
hard to
agenda.
find natural fabric clothing. I mean, because that is something I've been looking into more in these past couple years. I'm not a big clothing shopper, but I've been trying to replace items with first just 100% natural fabrics and then trying to get organic, and it is so tough. And then even a lot of the natural fiber stuff, they work in like a lot of elastic or something, to make it extra stretchy so it fits a wider range of sizes. But then you're wearing it and then the elastic just gives out. So you still have a piece of clothing, but it's trying to fall off your body. It's like, well, that's not very helpful.
These are Yeah, no, it's all pieces of it, and I consider that. So Azure's going to be working in that space as well. We have a new brand that we're going to be calling Azure Loom
Hmm.
coming up. I shouldn't be. Maybe I should. I'm probably jumping the gun on announcing that yet because it's still
Well,
probably about 6 months out.
well, it's
But
okay. It's not going to be, I don't think anybody's going to be saying, where is it? Where is it immediately? They can just have to look forward to when it works out.
but yeah, the Azure Loom is coming. So that's the food part and the toxin part and that piece, and that is a huge part of our health. But we also have the emotional, spiritual side. Somebody who is very emotionally distraught, depressed, etc., all the time, does not have good emotional support, um, and or spiritual support. I kind of put those together.
Mhm.
Um, it does also manifest in poor health. It
Absolutely.
affects the physical health of our bodies when we are emotionally distraught in some way. And that's one of the reasons I really enjoy the program that we do here at Azure with the churches, because we have we call it around the table program where we, help support churches in forming Azure drops
Mhm.
and,
And
and
you have a lot
promoting
of great
food through
material on
that.
the Azure site too. I would encourage people to go ahead and take a look at not just what's being sold there, but you have so much wonderful supportive material with the recipes and the health and wellness information. And I started digging and I had no idea all that stuff was on there, which your team has put an amazing amount of work into that. It's just really nice to see because so many, well, frankly, sales websites, well, it's just sell, 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 sell. But again, that's the difference with Azure Standard. You can tell that you're not just selling, it's about building community and helping people.
Well, it's about, and that's what I tell my team all the time. As long as we're in our mission, inspire healthy and abundant living, that's stuff that's worth doing. It's, if my goal was to make as much money as possible, that would not be what we'd be putting on there. But it's not. It's to inspire healthy and abundant living. And if we can make enough money to continue to grow the company and all that, that's great. That's important. I don't want to ever be back in the situation
Yeah.
that we were back in 2017, where we couldn't pay our vendors on time. I never want to be there again. So, obviously we try to, run a ship that, generates a profit. That's the system we're in. And
Yeah, in our
it's,
society, profit a lot of times it's become like this dirty word, but you can't have a business, you can't pay your employees, you can't pay your vendors without money to do that. So obviously that has to be a priority for a business. It's just keeping it reasonable.
yeah, we have to balance that and be able to, find the ways to value add more even. And we've been doing a lot more of that. So a lot of, you probably notice in the Azure world, we're doing more and more manufacturing, and we're doing more and more private label, and we're doing more and more
Mhm.
repackaging. And those are all, I mean,
And your community outreach events, I see Azure popping up all over the US, representing.
yeah, no, that's a little bit, yeah. And I've done probably, I think I'll be, by the time this season's over, I'll be at like 12, 12 speaking events, or 12 events around the country that I
That's a
gave
lot.
presentations at. So it's a fair amount of traveling for one summer. I guess it goes into October this year, but
Mhm.
um, but anyway, it's kind of it's a good thing because we're still, first of all, I get to meet a lot of our customers. So if you go to one of those events, we'd love to see you and meet you. But also it gives the ability to, promote healthy and abundant living.
Are you going to
There's
be at the Homesteaders of America conference in October by chance out in Virginia?
Don't think I am at that one. So I've got Ozark coming up in September, Washington D.C. in September. Got Back to the Basics and
And that's another thing that's great is that there are so many community events popping up around the US with people getting back to basics, learning about homesteading, learning about gardening, learning about self-reliant skills, learning about preparedness. And, a lot of these events didn't exist just a few years ago. So it's good to see that interest growing too.
yeah, no, it's great. And we even have our own event now, and that's coming up just next weekend. I don't know, you probably won't
Yeah,
just won't get out
I'm
in
not
time, but
coming to that one. I'm not much of a traveler, but I did see the notifications.
uh, but anyway, um, it is really good, I think, for people of like mind to get together and create community around
Mhm.
healthy living and healthy food and healthy families. And so that's why we want to support those events as
Mhm.
much as we can.
Mhm. Well, we've been chatting for quite a while, so I'll ask you, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to share before we wrap up? I mean, yeah, again, definitely I'll say check out the book if you haven't, because holy smokes, yeah, there's so much stuff that we haven't even touched
Yeah,
on.
we
But
would love for as many folks as possible to pre-order. The book is not quite out yet, be still a few more weeks, but pre-order if you can, because that will give us if we can get on all the bestseller lists, then um, that will give us a lot bigger platform.
Mhm.
We will get a lot more media, free media, basically, that allows us to get the message out more about healthy and abundant living. So please do that at seedsofhopebook.com. You can put your pre-orders in, and we're selling. It's through Simon Schuster, so it's almost all the major
Yeah, the major
booksellers.
outlets I saw: Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Books a Million, and
All of
a
it.
couple other ones too, I think.
Yep. So we'd love for that. I think there'll be some interesting stories in there that
Oh yeah.
give be worth the read,
Yeah,
and
like the
hopefully create a
bull, the
little bit
bull on the side of the road. That was just crazy. But
of Helga and Charlie. Yes, that
yep.
was a super changing point in my life. Young, you know, in my younger early days of Azure. I appreciate what you guys are being a part of what you guys are doing here and talking to you. Thank you. And
I'm glad that you could make time, because I'm sure things are always busy, because yeah, lots of moving parts. And thank you for
absolutely.
sharing your story.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good rest of the day.